All right, folks. Thank you so much for being here at this early hour. We were all a little unsure if we were going to get a crowd at 8 a.m., so you are the champions that you woke up and got here. This is going to be a conversation about reimagining elder care in the United States with three extraordinary individuals. We only have 50 minutes together, so I'm going to talk as little as possible. But I will tell you, my name is Courtney Martin. I'm a journalist, and I co-founded something called the Solutions Journalism Network, which is more we're trying to get journalists to investigate and bring rigor to covering solutions in the same way that they do problems. So I'm very excited about the way in which these three people are architecting solutions for one of the most critical challenges and biggest opportunities of our time. I'm going to introduce each of them one by one, and then you'll hear from them a little bit. And then the last 15 minutes, we're going to do an audience Q&A, so please be thinking about your questions. So first up, I'm going to talk about Dr. Bill Thomas, who's over here in the blue. He's a physician whose wide-ranging work explores the terrain of human aging. Best known for his health system innovations, he's the founder of a global nonprofit called the Eden Alternative, which I want to go there, the Eden Alternative, right? Which works to improve the care provided to older people. He's also the creator of The Greenhouse, which Provider Magazine has called the pinnacle of culture change. He's an author, entrepreneur, musician, teacher, farmer. So we have a lot to learn from him. This is a major Renaissance man. So Bill, set the stage a little for us. The US is aging, probably the people in this room know. Between 2012 and 2050, the number of adults over age 60 will jump from 43 to 84 million, representing about 20% of the population. Meanwhile, smaller and more scattered families means there's a larger number of older people who are growing old virtually alone. So what are the challenges and what are the opportunities as you see it? Can you kind of set the stage for us a little bit? Yeah.
America has a bad housing hangover. The vision of housing in America really, as we know it today, really emerged after the end of World War II. And it was all about attached garages and basketball hoops, the ideal image. There's always more varied than that. But what we had when those houses were built, what we had when those houses were built was a population where a quarter of the people were under the age of 15. What we have now, as noted, is a fifth of the population soon over 60. So the housing we built for the purpose of raising kids and driving to work turns out to be death traps for people who are trying to age with independence and dignity. So even though I'm a geriatrician, and you might think I would talk about fun geriatrician stuff. Is
that a genre?
And boy, is there ever some fun stuff. Okay. But I'm really here to talk about housing because in my experience as a clinician and working with very cool policymakers and innovators, it's housing that gives and takes away your independence, far more than changes in your clinical condition. So all you have to do is run through your mind older relatives of yours who've already passed through this portal. If we don't change the portal, you will pass through the portal. You will leave your home and enter into an old age archipelago. So the time really to rethink housing and to reimagine housing as the core of the solution, that time is really right now.
And tell us more about how you're doing that, because you've architected some solutions here.
Yeah, so the thing I've been working on for the past few years is, again, even though I'm a geriatrician, I've actually become a maker. I've spent a couple of years in a garage learning G-code and working with CNC machines. And we found a way to take sheet goods from a building supply store, machine them in such a way that we can use Japanese joinery techniques and make a compact house that can be assembled in one day. And what's cool about it is, in order to change housing, we have to have the tool to do that. And the actual housing industry is very, very antiquated. It is nearly 100% analog, and we're digitalizing plans and pieces that come together, something like a Lego building block, to make a house of 300 to 600 square feet that's complete and can go in a lot of locations you can't put a regular American 2,700 square foot house. So we call this approach Minka, and it's actually the Japanese word for a house for regular people. And we've been working with architects in Denmark and experts like Rodney to really think through how do we create a new housing option that is digitally native, that is compact, that's engineered for independence, and is affordable. Wow. That's what we're doing.
And how far off is it? And where are we in the...
We're doing it.
You're doing it. All
Yes.
right. How is it going?
I'm going to tell you a fun story. I'll two fun things. One thing is I have been blessed in my life with a daughter who lives with profound developmental disabilities. Her name's Haley. She's tremendous. And we actually built the first Minka. She's 23. We built the first Minka for Haley. Ah. So Haley is Minka's test pilot. Mm. And then as we were doing the work, my sister, who works in economic development, her father-in-law died, and she said, we need a Minka. So we made another Minka for her. And now we're working on projects, and I'll name one fun project. We're working on the world's first blended student elder housing at the University of Southern Indiana. We're using Minkas on campus, not to put the senior housing here and the student housing here, together. And we call this magic. Multi-ability, multi-generational, inclusive co-living. So I think the era of the facility and the institution is coming to an end. I am a nursing home abolitionist. And so are you. Right. But if you're going to overthrow an $80 billion industry, you better have something in your pocket. And I think Minka and things like Minka are going to really redefine how we think about spaces, urban spaces, communities, neighborhoods, but we have to have the tools. So to put a cap on it, it's really this idea that this housing hangover is extremely dangerous to you. And you think you can put it off another year, another 6 months, but if you don't start rethinking your housing at some point, then you're gonna not have choices. And that's the thing that really hurts me the most, people not having choices.
I think I want Rodney to jump in here,
Yeah.
and I want to introduce him, but I want to also point out it's not just dangerous to the elders in the room, it's also dangerous to me, right? The middle-agers or the youngers, because intergenerational interaction is like the lifeblood of a thriving life, right? We've done this age segregation thing, and then those of us who are younger really miss out on some of that interaction as well. So Rodney, next to me here, Harold, leads AARP's Future of Housing efforts and is an expert on housing preferences, neighborhood choice, community livability. Before joining AARP, he worked as a research and evaluation consultant, a researcher and instructor for the University of Maryland. So he's got a lot to jump in on here, but I want to start with the intergenerational aspect. There's actually been this explosion in multi-generational housing. Some of you might know this since 2008. And much of the research, despite what the headlines say about that, it's sort of a doomsday story in the headlines of like the boomerang kids who are in the basement leeching off their parents. But actually, if you talk to people who have been in intergenerational housing, they report very high levels of quality of life. The Obama White House was a multi-generational house, right? Talk to us about that. Why do you think there's such a bad rap in the media about intergenerational housing versus what you're seeing when you talk to folks who are both aging that way and getting to benefit from being with elders?
Right, that's a great question. And I think about it this way, that we have, that Bill pointed out the lack of options that we have, and I think that's based in an older understanding of how we should live. We have, that whole discussion about the aging population coming, that's a fundamental change. That we'll have more people over the age of 65 and under 18 for the first time in American history by 2035, right? So all of our mindsets, unprecedented. Yeah. And so all of our mindsets are based differently, and I think what we have is a fundamental procrastination problem in this country. And I'm not gonna pick on the people that were late to the session on that. But the idea that we don't think about issues until they happen, all right? So you might not make a housing choice or until I have kids, or another housing choice until I'm retired, or another housing choice until maybe I've injured myself and no longer can get up the stairs or what have you. And doing those things in advance is what really helps. Yeah. So fundamentally, when we start with multi-generational housing, it starts us off from a different place of thinking, well, now we're going to make a home that serves people at all levels. That the concept of universal design and others are based on the fact that people at every age and every level of physical ability should be able to thrive just from a purely physical standpoint. So we're going to have a way for everybody to get around the house, from the young kid to grandma. And then what you're getting at, though, is a social side of it, too. Right? So that there are... frankly, the economist side of me says it's inefficient to live the way that we do. Right? That the older generation's history and knowledge of what's gone on from the family to the community and beyond, passing that on is great. The younger population's energy or knowledge of technology and whatnot. I've seen so many cases where there have been an older resident and younger roommate, where the younger roommate helps with technology and helps understanding, and they get life advice and wisdom from the older adult. Maybe there's some light caregiving that's exchanging hands. It's just a much more efficient way to think about it, that we're getting the advantages of multiple different people and multiple different generations in one place, whether it's a home or a community. So I think one thing I want to get to is, Bill's a doctor of people, I'm a doctor of urban planning. And so I look at it this way, that we have to create these same kind of principles in our communities, in our housing, and just in our lives throughout. So the idea is that we should generally kind of embrace this multi-generational thing, because we are a multi-generational society now, whether we like it or not.
Right. And we like it, right? We like
I like
it. I mean, all of us have that lived experience. That intergenerational interaction is amazing. It helps us thrive. So tell us about the Livability Index. AARP puts out this Livability Index every year. It just launched on Thursday, so we have brand new data to share with all of you. Why does it matter? How do you guys calculate it?
Well, and we talked about the revolution that Bill was trying to foment earlier. One of the pieces of that, frankly, is the information. So we need to have information on what's going on and really the shortcomings of some of the models we've been thinking about for years and generations. But it's hard to put your hands around it. AARP has been talking about livable communities for years, and it was, we had to wrap our hands around, well, what does that actually mean? What does that look like on the ground? And again, our definition of that is based around a place that works for people regardless of your age, regardless of your income, regardless of your physical ability. The more options that you have to meet those needs, the better off your neighborhood or community is. That's basically what we tried to actually put a number to. So let's just show it to the folks here. If you go to arp.org/livability index, you'll see our 2018 index, and you'll see our list of top communities for 2018 there. By different sizes. So you can go ahead on your mobile device, I won't mind. And then if you actually click on the index tool at the top, you'll get to the tool itself. And in here, you can type in an address around the country. So any state, any county, any city, any zip code, any neighborhood is in the index. The more precise an answer will give you on what your livability is. So I typed in the address of this building, and it gives us the census block group that you can see from this map of where we are. It's got a 68 overall, which is a pretty high score. The average is 50. The index has these 7 categories that you can see: housing, neighborhood, transportation, environment, health, engagement, and opportunity. And we basically curated a set of metrics. There's 60 metrics in here, or 40 that are on the ground, kind of metrics of measuring things like housing affordability, or are there parks nearby, or is it safe, are there transportation options, and 20 public policies. If you don't have affordable housing, is there a housing trust fund in place? Is there a universal design or visitability law in place? So once you do that, you have that number at the top. You can see where your community is, and that helps you understand, how livable is this place? How many options are there that I have, and how does it compare to other places? So just quickly, I'll run through what it actually looks like when you click on it. You can see here that we've clicked on a neighborhood, and it'll tell you how many grocery stores and farmers markets are within a walk. There's a policy example of whether there's policies in place on transit-oriented development, which helps build neighborhoods near transportation options. Here's all the metrics that you can see lined up with change over time. And change over time was our big advancement this year. We've been doing it since 2015. But now we actually have the ability, and we set it up so you can see if your community has been moving. So the sample community that we've got, you can see one green arrow that shows that they're doing better in one category and roughly the same in all the others. It's really a platform to see, are we getting better over time with this?
And this is actually an opportunity for advocacy, right? Because it's one thing if you want to look up where are we going to move to, but if you are rooted in a place and you want it to become more livable for people of all ages, you could look at that change over time and say, oh, here's where we need to be advocating as citizens.
Absolutely. It's a dual target audience for me with this. One is talking to the policymakers themselves. Hey, on this side of town, there's no transportation access and no grocery stores. You should try to think about that when you're doing your planning work. But also to talk to the individuals. If you're making a housing decision, maybe I want to move to the neighborhood that has a park and choices. And if they don't have those in my neighborhood, and I've even done this in my own neighborhood in Maryland, take the Livability Index into your town meeting and advocate, in my case, that we need better health options here. Why is the health care satisfaction level so low in this region? We need a new hospital center. And that kind of thing is being done by many people across the country.
That's great. And I love one of the leverages here is that if you design a community for those with the least amount of ability, whether that's physical or, transportation-wise or economic, it's best for everybody, right? Which is one of the ways it makes it this is not just an elder care issue, this is an everybody issue.
And that's the biggest thing. It gets back to that procrastination problem that, we don't think about the fact that we're not going to drive one day, for example, right? Men outlive their driving years by, I think it's 7 years, and women by either 10 or 15. And so many people find themselves in that situation in a neighborhood that they chose when they could drive, and now they're stuck. So the idea that we're thinking ahead and looking for the people who don't drive today means that if I don't drive later, or don't want to drive, or can't drive, I then have that option. This whole thing, I think with the panel so far, to me, is really about just having the wide range of options.
Yeah.
So that's what we try to capture here.
Interestingly also, do you know teenagers are no longer that invested in getting their driver's license? There's this huge plummet of when I was 16, it was like everyone was like, we have to, and now it's totally plummeted. So it's all full circle, right? Tina, let's bring you in here. I know you're going to bring the soul to this panel. We've talked a lot about sort of housing and systems, which is really important. But you've been right up front with people who are aging and dealing with illness for years. Tina Staley is a social worker residing in Denver. She has 25 years experience working in mental health and chronic illness with an emphasis on improving quality of life for cancer patients. She has just a tremendous bio. She's just done this beautiful TEDx Asheville talk that you should look up. She has a film called What Love Is, Pathfinders 50, that was shown nationally on PBS that her work is featured in. Talk to us about how you came to this work. When did you first start really working with people in elder care, and what was the motivation for that?
It's interesting because you know how they say everything you learn in life you actually learned in kindergarten? Well, everything I've really learned in life about my profession as a clinician, I actually learned when I was 13 years old. And I lived in Asheville, North Carolina. And I decided to volunteer in a nursing home, and one of those candy stripers where you wear the cute outfits and you go in and you speak with the elderly people. And when I started visiting, I didn't have any idea in terms of how to have a conversation, which actually many of us don't have an idea of how to have a conversation with somebody who's sick, possibly facing end of life, or just lonely. And so I would go into the room and I would realize that everything about that person was right in the room with them. So I would start by asking them stories about their life from a photograph. And what I realized is in the depths of loneliness, the depths of despair, that when people actually share their stories, when they actually share, maybe their sorrows, their fears, their vulnerability, their joys, their happiness, even their fears, it really allowed them to feel where their life had purpose, where their life had meaning. And you would actually see them shift right in front of you in terms of just that sense that they mattered, that sense that they were not invisible, the sense that somebody cared enough just to ask them questions about who they were and who they are. Then the second thing that I learned from working with them is that several, not everyone, that death was the ticker tape of their entire life. And the different fears they had that they were never expressing because that was the elephant in the room. So it was the fear of being a burden. It was the fear of not being remembered. It was the fear of not having their mental faculties. It was the fear that, that their children wouldn't be okay. So the minute, we just said, so what's important to you, or what are you frightened about? Then all of a sudden, just by naming it, there was this sort of ease that, we could find a way to help reframe it. Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes the fears, whether it's being in pain, now we have hospice and you don't have to have that pain, or really being a burden, examine how true that is or not true. Mm-hmm. But then what also took place was if there was a Bible there, okay, so you think, who wants to have the end of life or the life beyond conversation? That is really going to the edge, right? Mm-hmm. But if you just saw in the room that there was a Bible or a locket or a Buddha or something, you could say, wow, so tell me about your faith. Like where do you feel you're going or not? Mm-hmm. Where do you feel, what means something to you? So through the spirituality and being able to connect to something that was greater than themselves. Mm-hmm. It could have been once I had a jazz musician who loved jazz, who didn't have faith. Mm-hmm. But just by helping them connect with something that allowed them to feel that sense of greatness, that sense of beyond. And then the last piece, I always remember in speaking with anyone, whether it's facing the end of life or chronic illness or just preparing, is you're not dead yet. And so what does that mean? Well, we might not be able to do what we used to do. We have to find new normals. But it doesn't mean that you can't still have a quality of life. Mm-hmm. And what is quality of life? To me, quality of life is still having those moments where you have a beautiful conversation with your child. Mm-hmm. Those moments where you look forward to a good meal. Those moments where you watch something that just, makes you laugh. Mm-hmm. It's seeing beauty, it's a garden, and it's still having things to look forward to. So what I learned in this was, let's play the music. Mm-hmm. Don't let the music stop.
Right.
And that's the secret, is don't let the music stop.
It's kind of this paradox, though, right? Because on the one hand, you're arguing, which I think is the profound center of this thing, is the reason we've had nursing homes and all this age segregation is we don't want to talk about death and we don't want to deal with aging, and we're these Americans who don't want to acknowledge limitations or illness. And on the other hand, you're saying that the sort of like longevity comes from not giving up before you give up, right? Mm-hmm. Like not ending it before it ends. So how do you hold that? I mean, how do you get people to face death, face aging, face illness, but also with some level of peace, some level of surrender that's necessary for some of the kinds of patients you're working with, but also hold out that there is still joy to be had?
Well, I would just like to, before I answer that, I would like to say about our society and how they view aging.
Right.
Because I believe, first of all, we have to look at, we're all living longer. And are we living better?
Right.
So when you look at the longer years, it's not your 20s, your 30s, your 40s. It's as an older adult.
Right.
Okay? So we have to watch our stereotypes and think back in your life how you viewed, older people.
Right.
Was it like, they're not sharp enough, or there they are getting on the cruise ship, and that's not going to be me, And so how do you see your stereotypes? Because I think we need a paradigm shift on how we actually view aging in America. Because, as I mentioned before, the invisibility. People feel, am I a burden? Am I not a burden? So by teaching our young people how to have conversations, by allowing grandmothers to not just feel that they need to be a grandmother to a biological grandchild, but that they can be a grandmother to the kids down the street, to people, young children who are abused that need love. So part of going into older age is about finding purpose and meaning. Because we had this idea of retirement at 65, and this is nothing against golf and bridge in the room, because that's huge. That's a connector. That's a social network. But what happens when your golf swing isn't like it used to be in 4 years? What do you do, right? Where's the purpose? Where's the meaning? Where do you feel needed?
Right.
So part of working with people is helping them look at where can they still make a contribution.
Right.
Right? Where can they still have purpose? Where can they give back? Helping them understand what they stand for, that then can follow the volunteering, the connecting. Because I want to tell you, the one thing amongst the aging is when 70% are women over the age of 75, and social isolation is the biggest epidemic, and loneliness.
Right.
And loneliness.
Right.
And that is what we're facing as a healthcare crisis, is loneliness and isolation, and especially magnitude at that older period of life for single women. That is why I'm thrilled about this housing.
Right.
Because then we can all not have to be. So what can we do to prepare? Quickly, we can really watch of how we become socially connected with each other. Okay, so you prepare by, and this is a great group because we're all connected and we have clubs and we do things and things like that. But it's also about providing that opportunity for seniors, for older people, even people with chronic illness. You know, the groups that when you don't feel alone and you feel like you're not separated, like you are still a part of society, that is the type of environments that we absolutely have to have. And then the ability within your own life to even prepare now of where can you give back. Because this aspect of giving back, I learned a lot with cancer patients. What was it that when a cancer patient would have chemo and be sitting there in the chair that they would say, when I get better, I want to give back? Because it was something that they learned, that is the secret of happiness.
Right. And all of this is making me think that Americans are particularly bad at this, right? I mean, we have some friends from all over the world here at this conference, and I feel like when you think about the ways in which Americans define worthiness, right? It's all about achievement and, being able-bodied and all of these stereotypes. And then when we think about aging and death and even bringing back your daughter with a disability, like, how we value people shows up in how we plan housing, right? We're like putting the people who are not these like by your bootstraps, industrious Americans out of sight, out of mind, and we're creating a crisis because we all know that that's actually not the reality for any of us. We'll all experience disability at some point, right? Do you gain? You said you're working with these Danish designers. Are there other countries that you gain inspiration from?
Very much. And I just want to say first off, I blame John Wayne.
I didn't see that one coming. All right, tell us about that.
Speaking as an American, the ideal of independence is I don't need anybody. I don't need any help.
Right.
There's never been a human who's ever existed on Earth who hasn't needed help, but we create a false narrative. And so people who really could use some help around the house, close the door. Some of you have gone through this with older relatives. And so what I try to do, very much aligned with your work, is say to people, independence doesn't mean not getting help. Independence means defining the terms on which you receive help and on which you give help. Back to that chemotherapy thing. People have a incredibly powerful reciprocity meter, and we always are trying to balance how much we're giving and receiving. Either out of balance either way is bad. But when you live in a society that tells you, an older person or an infirm person, every day you're getting more than you're giving, those people pull back, pull into their shell. And a lot of what was talked about in terms of loneliness and social isolation are people trying to avoid the feeling that they're taking more than they're giving.
That's very powerful. That's really powerful. And it also, I'm glad you invoked a man, because I want to say, as a feminist, I feel like women have traditionally been caretakers. We take care of babies. We know about helplessness. Like, this is not something we don't know about. We may not be great at being taken care of, because a lot of women spend their whole life taking care of others. But I feel like this is particularly a shift around like masculinity and this idea of dependence and independence. I mean, do you see women and men aging differently in that regard? You were mentioning this huge proportion of women aging. Rodney, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a fascinating thing to think about, the gendering of this, it goes back to me about the whole mindset about aging, that we don't expect to age, we don't think we are, and there may be something that's different between the fact that we do have that older population that is largely female, and that they are largely isolated, and that is having these huge costs, and we're not thinking about it. And so for me, it comes to this tendency that we have to split the middle on things. We shoot for the average. We try to make sure that the average person's needs are met. That's how we ended up with airbags that broke the arms of people that were 5 feet tall, because we said the average person can sit in the seat and the airbag will work for them. And I think it's the same kind of mindset that we have generally, without thinking about people that are in specific categories, that have specific needs, that we're not getting that wide range. And that there may be some Americanness innately to that, but the idea that if we can talk about the wide range of needs, I think it's the time that we need to embrace the complexity of society, of relationships, of people. We have to disrupt these old paradigms that just say, there's one way to do things, here's the average way, and we'll just do it that way.
Yeah.
We have to take into account all people.
Yeah. We're going to switch to Q&A. I'm going to ask one more question, so be thinking about yours, and please raise your hand. Bill, I wanted to quote something you've written that I just love so much and get you to talk a little bit more about it. You said, "Years spent in the company of very old people helped me grasp a handful of deep truths about life, love, and happiness. These elders showed me how, given sufficient time, even the smallest changes can remake us. There are, in my opinion, few things more soulful than being a patient and faithful companion of the very old, the frail, and the infirm. My patience helped me accept who I was, who I am, and who I am becoming." So one of the things we're talking about is the inevitability of aging, but one of the things we're also talking about is the opportunity for those of us who can caretake and be near people who are aging to get benefit from that. Talk more about what you
I will. In fact, this is something I'm passionate about. Let me start with the word caregiver. That's not language or framing that I like. Because in American society, we frame caregiving as a caregiver and a recipient. And in a lot of families, the female member of the family that gets the shortest straw becomes the caregiver, and it becomes a dyadic relationship that is stunting to both people. And because I was operating as a physician, instead of being locked into a one-to-one relationship, I was having lots of relationships with people. And I began to think about this more as care partnering. So care partnering is actually much more akin to how we operate a household with young children. And as soon as the kid is big enough to put the milk on the table, they do it.
Right.
Okay? You don't
And they love
caregive.
doing it,
Yes.
to your point. Yeah.
Exactly. So we often disable older people or people living with infirmity because they're being cared for. And the story I was trying to get at with that quote is that if you open your eyes and ears, you're in a situation where your care partner can teach you a lot of things. And when that care partner who's teaching you understands that they're giving, it lightens their burden as well. So some of the most unhappy caregivers I've ever seen have actually been the most committed and devoted caregivers because their reciprocity meter is totally out of whack.
Wow.
And they are not happy. And you've seen this sometimes in families. The second thing, if I could say, is that I just spoke individually. Culturally, We're living in a society that's governed by adults without elder supervision.
And adults, I think we should put in quotes, Bill.
Yeah.
Right at this moment, I think
Actually,
adults should be in quotes.
And I'll even
personally.
say,
Yeah.
adulthood, we talk about aging. You know what the problem is in America? It's adulthood.
Yeah.
Adulthood is out of frickin' control.
Yeah.
It's gone mad. And not only has adulthood gone mad, we've given adults all the power. And all you have to do is look around to see what happened. And in many societies around the world and through history, adults have had the power, but they've been gentled by and counseled by elders in a variety of different ways. And instead of that, our society did the opposite. We
Right.
exiled our elders into a hidden world. We pushed them off the map of the world. And all that were left were the adults. And I'll say one last thing, if I may, about this. You can see the consequences of this in the adultification of childhood. The reservoirs of space and time and freedom that were once reserved to childhood are increasingly encroached upon by adultified behaviors, expectations, outcome metrics. And this expansion of adulthood has been a very toxic phenomenon for us. So when people in my presence talk about what are we going to do about the problem of aging, I always like to reframe it as what are we going to do about the problem of adults?
Right. And what are we going to do about the way this is something for all of us to be thinking about. How do you measure the worth of a person? Like, what are the metrics that you think matter? Whether it's a child and you're saying, do grades matter? Do test scores matter? Whether it's an elder person, does ability matter in particular ways? Like, that's really personal inner work that all of us have to do, right? Because we are society. We can't blame this on, we can blame it on John Wayne, but we can't blame it on like those people out there because we are making the society, right? I know you have questions for these incredible humans. Yes, right here. There's someone coming with a mic.
So I don't mean to be a downer, but we have the number of 80, 90, and 100-year-olds exceeding, growing dramatically over the next 30 years. We know that healthcare costs increase exponentially with age. We have a Medicare population dramatically increasing, and we have Medicare beneficiaries paying into Medicare a fraction of what they take out in their health care costs. How does the panel see us addressing this big problem?
Can I
wants to
start?
take that
Would that be
on?
okay? I know Ronnie's probably got something to say too as well, and Tina. First off, many people living to their 80s and 90s and 100s is the greatest victory of human history. It is a testament to the greatest period of comparative peace and prosperity, in the history of the world. It's a testament to our technological ability. It is the gold star of humanness to have so many people living so long. So that's one thing. Two, most older people are healthy. In fact, older people are the healthiest people in the world. Because if you want to be 94, you've got to be healthy when you're 87. If you want to be 102, you've got to be healthy when you're 96. Okay? So now to the point being made, which is very true. There is a catastrophic level of expense at the very end of life, where this idea that we have to fight death leads older people to be treated in futile and barbaric ways that also cost a gigantic amount of money. So to answer your question, if I had a magic wand and I wanted to fix the accounting issues you're talking about, which are well documented, I would ensure that every single American met you and that you could talk to them about what really matters and when you get down to what really matters, it's not spending 3 months in the ICU before you die. And it's about being with people you love. This, in my view, is where the problem is. It's a distorted, going right back to your work, it's a distorted vision of death and the struggle against death that is catastrophically expensive.
Yeah, I mean, I feel passionate. Oh, do you mind if I feel passionate about this around the conversation from a psychosocial point of view, because I've looked at what happens when people haven't really faced their fears, dealt with death, and how it plays out in the end around grasping for that last moment cure. Because so often we're focused on the cure and not on having those shared moments of what you can have. And when and I get that we all want to live, but when you can help somebody with their thoughts and with their mind start to shift from the fear and the unknown into hope for the better quality of the time you have left, hope for those beautiful moments with your family, hope for conversation that's not all geared around the medical, but around who we are as individuals and what we love and who we love, then that to me takes that grasping, that desperateness, the expense, and lowers it considerably.
Right. And I feel like we're experiencing a culture shift. If you think about death over dinner and, all of these incredible, BJ Miller's TED Talk that has like 7 million views now. And, people are, it feels like culturally we're starting to catch up, but structurally to the point here and economically, it's not necessarily following that conversation. I mean, you do such structural work, Rodney. What does it look like to actually think about this on a systems level as opposed to one conversation at a time?
Well, and the one system I'm thinking about particularly are the system of our living arrangements, our our physical space, right? That we did a study at AARP recently that showed that social isolation costs the federal government billions of dollars in the care expenses of those that are in those situations. So by having people more connected, whether it's the housing options that get you more connected, some of these social engagement kind of opportunities to do that, we might address a part of the billion-dollar question there.
So before we even get to healthcare upstream, there's a system.
And to me, this is the whole. This is my area, right?
Yeah.
That the idea before we even get to the incident, before we have the fall that gets you into the hospital that requires the care of the medical folks, let's actually build a home with universal designed features that helps you prevent that fall from happening in the first place. And this gets back to my theme of we're doing things for the average and not thinking about all, because if we were thinking about all, we would have our housing built with to avoid all of these falls that also cost us billions of dollars, helping people that have suffered a fall, and that often spirals for folks. That's the first incident that spirals down in their health status. So if we go upstream and work on that, because we've thought about the fact that we've got a great number of people over 85 and 95 and 100, then we're starting to solve these problems before they happen.
Right.
We have to start having an all ages approach. We have to disrupt these old paradigms and think about the fact that we are an aging society, and it's not a problem, it's a feature.
Right.
And so now this is where we are. Let's start to think about how we work that to our advantage.
Yeah, and as iGen Poo of Caring Across Generations will talk about later, this thread is going to get pulled through this conference in the closing session. It's also an employment opportunity, right? There are all these jobs being created that are
huge.
Maybe we won't call them caretaking, care partnering jobs that we can be thinking about as well. More questions up here, right here. This lovely lady. Do we have the mic somewhere? She's stuck.
Stuck in traffic.
Right here, up here. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you very much. This is really fascinating. I have a father who's 95, almost 96, and I'm curious about the multi-aging and multi-generational, which I think in principle, makes a lot of sense. He, about 15 years ago, when my mother passed away, moved to, Erickson, the Erickson properties all over the country. And he is so happy. He has been so happy. And it's not multi-generational. I think it's 55 and above.
It is multi-generational. He's 95 and he's hanging out with people who were in their 70s.
True.
Yeah.
So in that way. But at 85, he said to me, I have more friends than I've ever had in my life.
Right.
And to me, just his willingness, this idea, I want to stay in my home, I want to stay in my home. He was so much happier moving to an apartment. It's like a college campus. And these things are sprouting up like crazy all over the country. So they're not huge multi-age, but it seems to me such a huge advantage, and he certainly has benefited from that. So I just wanted your observations on that model.
I'd say a couple of things. Age, a lot of the stigma comes from age segregation. So, and your dad's a remarkable specimen in that he was able to see past the stigma. But if I could withdraw the lesson that your dad is presenting to us here now, in terms that was given to me by one of my patients who was very social in her 90s, had a lot of friends of different ages. I talked to her about it, and she said, you know the friend funnel, right? And I'm like, no, I don't know the friend funnel. She goes, all your life you have friends, and new friends are coming into the friend funnel on the top, and all your life, friends are falling out of the bottom. And, they move away, they get married, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And then comes a day, she's talking about other people who are socially isolated. People stop putting new friends in the top of the friend funnel. But old friends don't stop dropping out of the bottom. And what happens is, without realizing how it happened, you go from being really socially connected to socially isolated. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, it takes effort and opportunity to do what your dad's doing. He's still adding friends to the friend funnel. And hopefully, in his case, he'll continue to do that until he passes. But my point to everybody who's got friends, I'm hoping that's most of you, is that you've got a job to do at every age. Continue adding friends to your friend funnel. Add friends of different ages, different backgrounds, different situations. That's your best insurance policy to avoiding what Tina was talking about, the social isolation.
So we've run out of time. I'm going to take that as Bill's marching orders to all of you is to keep adding friends to the friend funnel, which I love.
There you go.
Tina and Rodney, do you have anything that comes to mind that as these people are walking out of this room today, like what is the one thing that you would say, please do this?
Oh, boy. For me, please just find a way to find purpose and give back in the world.
Okay.
Through kindness.
Kindness is always good. I'm going to say we need to disrupt these old paradigms, that we need to start thinking about our future, our collective future, our individual future in different ways, and embrace the options that we need to do things, whether it's the senior living facility or a multi-generational apartment or something else. We need to know that and help create this wide range of options that will serve our needs into the future, and not shoot for just that average. There's not one solution to any problem and not to any issue. And so we need to really think holistically and broadly about the ways that we can meet our individual needs and societal needs as a whole.
Awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just say that next time you see, one of us or an elder person on the bench, just stop for a moment and just slow down your life and just be present with them.
Love that. Thank you all so much. You're so extraordinary.